Welcome to everyone to the Frontline Club, to our industry colleagues, to our partners, to the Reuters community, to our journalist fellows. Two things have gone into making this a very authentic experience today. One is the irony of a summer showcase. While it is a dour gray outside, very muggy on the first floor, very cold on this floor, we've ensured that it's absolutely timed to perfection. And the other one is that in a few hours from now, there is the minor event of a general election in this country. I can assure you, just so the record is set straight, we picked this date first, and we were far more organized than the people who picked the 4th of July. So it's not our fault. Just making that clear. The summer symposium is a marker of sorts. From the university's point of view or an academic point of view, it's almost a coming full circle of an academic year. But I think for the journalist programs, it's a point in time where we really stop and soak in all the work that's been done by the journalists, all the challenges that you've been trying to sort of untangle, and all the questions that you've been trying through the last few months to answer. Many of the questions that you hear today may resonate with some of you. So, whether you're talking about reinvigorating local journalism, or you're talking about what the role of climate is in the stories that we tell, or you're talking about the value of foreign correspondence and whether that's still an important space, or you're talking about the importance of personalizing news, or you're talking about the importance of news that is constructive. All of it is something that is probably a question that you're trying to answer. And I hope that the solutions you hear this evening, or at least the journey that you learn about this evening, provides some sort of pathway to where things are going next. I just want to say that even as we try to sort of unbundle many of these questions, and this question keeps coming back every time we discuss the whole role of journalism, which is what is the singular most important element in everything that's going into this? And to my mind, it remains the people. It is the journalists and the stories that you tell and the stories that you take forward, and it is the audience and the value that you create in their lives when you ensure that voices that are not being represented are finding a space. And when you ensure that you are driving so hard to provide balance in what sometimes may seem like a completely chaotic environment. The Reuters Fellowship has provided that for many decades. We haven't done it alone. I don't think anyone can. We are very, very grateful for the support of our partners, some of whom have been around for many decades, and some who are fairly new travelers down the path. But we're very grateful to have all of you in this journey with us. Thank you to Lauren and Juan. I don't know if they're both in the room, but a big thank you to them, to the rest of the Reuters team for everything that you do to make this fellowship program so special. Most of all, a very big thank you to Caitlin, who thinks so sensitively and so thoughtfully about every element of the program and really puts her all into it. And right on top of that list, a special and a slightly bittersweet thank you to Rasmus, our director, who has always and always been the number one champion, supporter, and ally of the fellowship program. I'm feeling a little bit emotional because I don't know if I'll see him here at the next summer showcase. I like to believe the Reuters Institute is a little bit Hotel California vibe, and we might have you here again. But thank you, Rasmus, for everything that you do every day for the program. Um, we had a fairly interesting rehearsal this morning. Manic, maybe one word, other words come to mind. But I think in all that madness, what really, really reflected in that room was the warmth and the friendship and the camaraderie that all of you share. And I hope that wherever you go, and life will take you many places, and we will be proud to see the places it takes you, I hope you always turn back to this community that you've created. It is your own, and everything that you have put into it is everything that will see it grow going from here. Enough from me. It's time for the stars of the evening. So let me bring on stage our journalist fellows. Just to remind everyone, we're parking questions for later over a drink so you can really hear them and then you can chat to them about their work. And our first presentation is coming up from Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff, who is from the UK and is a Thomson Reuters Foundation Fellow. Come on up.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like you to put your hand up if you can give me the full names of anyone who is on the bottom row of this picture. Okay, and can you put your hand up if you recognize anyone on the top row of the picture? Okay, so I want to introduce you to one of these women who you might not know. This is Joy Morgan. Joy by name, joyful by nature, her family told me. In 2018, she went missing. When I first reported on Joy's disappearance in February 2019, The Times, the UK's paper of record, had published 0 articles about Joy's case online, compared to half a dozen about the similarly worrying case of the beautiful, caring, and wonderful student, Libby Squire, who was reported missing just 6 days before Joy. BBC News ran 5 stories in total on Joy, compared to over 20 on Libby. The Guardian published 2 pieces on Joy online, compared to at least 10 on Libby. Both young women were later found murdered. But why did Libby's case immediately gain national attention when Joy's didn't? And what can we do to prevent that from happening in the future? For the past 6 months, I've been investigating how the media can improve its coverage of missing people, not just on the basis of race and gender, but for all people who go missing in this country and whose family and friends rely in part upon the media to help bring them home safely. In the UK, there is a crisis of missing people. More than 170,000 people go missing each year, and their cases strike a chord with the public because we can all imagine that feeling of pain and suffering that families and friends go through when separated from their loved ones. But the truth is, we only hear about a tiny minority of cases, and many important stories are missed. I want to tell you how we can improve media coverage moving forward. Number 1, be intentional. Is our reporting in service of the public, or is it sensationalized? In other words, do you really need that Madeleine McCann story? Not all elements of a missing case can or should make the news. Be judicious. Number 2, engage with complex stories. Many editors are wary of stories where there's a history of substance abuse or where the person has gone missing more than once. Specifically, they're looking for stories where the disappearance is unusual and where there's suspected foul play. But simple stories aren't always what the public want or need. Number 3, question our biases. There is still a refusal to acknowledge racism across British newsrooms, but missing white woman syndrome, which is the disproportionate media coverage of white, middle-class, often good-looking women and girls, undeniably exists in the UK. Only 4% of the population is black, but 14% of people who go missing are black in this country, and this is not reflected in our coverage. Number 4, collect data. Newsrooms should be aware of the types of stories and individuals they are prone to cover excessively and actively strive towards equitable coverage. Without data, we can't fix the problem. In the US, it's been found that black women are up to 25% less likely to receive coverage than white women. Number 5, diversify our newsrooms. Many journalists are working hard behind the scenes to tell missing black people's stories, like Melissa Segundo here on screen. That tells us something. Stories will be missed in homogenous newsrooms where there aren't black journalists. Number 6, make space for specialist roles. At present, the relationship between the public, the media, and the police is fundamentally broken. General reporters who have a particular focus on missing could forge better relationships between stakeholders and push for impartiality. Number 7, respect privacy and sensitivity. Everyone has the right to be forgotten. It can be hard for journalists to get stories over the line without families and friends willing to give interviews, but approaches during times of crisis should always be considerate. Families have spoken to me about being traumatized by journalist behavior. And finally, number 8, highlight support available to missing people and their loved ones. The charity Missing People is a great resource and should be used in a similar way to how the Samaritans are used for suicide reporting. Missing People are also creating their own set of media guidelines that will be disseminated around newsrooms, so please look out for them. So to conclude, we can all be part of this change, regardless of whether or not we are journalists. Help to bring missing people home or get them the justice that they deserve. It doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to keep on telling the same stories about the same type of people. I want to teach your newsrooms to do better, and please get in touch if you'd like to collaborate. Thank you.
Times have changed, Hanna.
They really have to. In a 20-year journalism career, I have spent most of the past few years covering local news. I have written stories about stolen bicycles, polluted lakes, new factories.
In my 18-year career, with most of the past few years in foreign correspondence for Nikkei, I have covered Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, East Timor. I even interviewed President Joko Widodo.
That's impressive, June. I covered the president's visit to my town of about 70,000 too. I also interviewed the winner of the Joensuu Ice Poetry Reading Contest.
I can't be that, Hanna. Being a correspondent at the time when the global south was gaining more influence has been the honor of a lifetime. I learned the importance of being physically present to capture the nuances and complexities of the local context, things one simply cannot grasp from afar.
This is true for local news journalists too. Nothing can beat being present to build a relationship and understand what truly matters to a community. Being an editor of a local newspaper has convinced me of the importance of an embedded local news ecosystem if we want to keep democratic, stable, transparent, and free society.
So we have spent 6 months here.
I spent 9 months.
We have spent a long time here trying to understand the future of foreign correspondence
And local news.
in a changing world. In Japan, subscriber numbers dropped by 40% in the past decade. Despite the fact that almost half of Japanese households still subscribe to a newspaper, media companies are struggling to stay afloat. Many companies are cutting back on costly operations. Unfortunately, foreign correspondents and foreign bureaus are no exception.
When I started in local journalism, printed newspaper was distributed to every home, and if you wanted to know something about your community, you could only get that information from a local newspaper. The two legs of earning were subscription fees and advertising sales. Both legs have been broken for years.
To understand the future of foreign correspondence, I spent my time at the Reuters Institute looking at the past. My eureka moment came from Dundee, Scotland, at the end of the 19th century, where in 1894, the Dundee Courier sent two female journalists on a groundbreaking round-the-world trip to report on the status of women globally. During their 9-month journey, Mary Iman and Bessie Maxwell visited 10 countries and penned 147 articles. This incredible experience gave two female journalists a more impartial perspective and a truly global mindset. Throughout the history, travelers have shown that journeying around the world has a transformative power. Mary and Bessie's pioneering adventure demonstrated that traveling can broaden a journalist's perspective and cultivate a real global outlook. As Tolkien said, not all who wander are lost.
And like June, I wanted to look to the future. How do we make our local digital offering so good that the people of Joensuu cannot stay away from our website? We keep saying good journalism, and that's true, but good journalism about what? What unique information do my readers need every day to live a better life that they can't get anywhere else more easily? There is no single answer for all local news outlets because the needs will be different among each grouping of neighbors. In my town, information everyone wants includes the temperature at the public pool without having to drive past to the entrance to check. Or how about the pattern of that 5-piece kika that won Joensuu's heavy metal knitting contest? Confirmation, condensation, context, local color, and a community. What will it look like when we are more driven by service than scoops?
There are limitations to consider if we go around the world today: cost, carbon capture, safety, and socioeconomic barriers, and addressing colonial mindsets. The spirit of this journey is to learn and gain experience. Mari and Bessie used the word little to consider what they saw in Asia 822 times in 147 stories. We don't want journalists repeating that mistake. And when it comes to costs, airline tickets generally cost between £2,000 and £4,000, and assuming a per diem of £100 per day, this might cost up to £7,000. It's a lot cheaper than it was in the 19th century, but it's still a large sum for an individual journalist to bear and a risky amount for a company to spend on a new employee. That's why I propose a repayment program from the salary that is waived after a certain number of years on the job. To ensure gender equality of the opportunity, careful attention should be paid to safety of the route for women, and perhaps a buddy system is needed. And we can't ignore the climate impact of this scheme. Where air travel is necessary, choose airlines using sustainable aviation fuel and opt for routes with alternative transport options.
If you want to shape your local newspaper to hyper-serve hyper-locally, the winning formula includes 4 components. 1. Stay local, stay close. When readers come to your website, they should see news from their area. That's your unique selling point that they won't find anywhere else. 2. Be trustworthy. In time of misinformation, trust is capital. Be sure you publish only verified information and maintain good journalistic principles. 3. Know your audience and their needs in 2024. Is there something missing in their life that local newspaper could serve? Look for what's important to your town and the gaps you can fill. Keep asking questions. 4. Be the fabric that brings people together. Make it easier for people to find each other, help each other, celebrate and mourn. Don't hide. Be proudly local and a big part of community. In August, I returned to my newsroom to experiment with these findings in my own newsroom and few others in our media group.
Even if the future of foreign correspondence does rely on local reporters, how do we ensure the desks are equipped to ask the right questions, understand the nuances, and collaborate fairly? A round-world training program will help to develop essential journalism skills and foster a cosmopolitan perspective, so crucial in today's interconnected world.
AI is coming, and the competition for people's time is fierce. Is it an opportunity for local media to do more? By embracing new approaches while still valuing on-the-ground reporting, we can ensure that journalism stays a vital human-in-the-loop skill.
Whether local or foreign, there is no substitute for embodied experience.
And nothing beats proximity for understanding what questions really matters.
Let's listen to the words of the Kurdish Iranian poet Mansour Afra.
مناظره تلویزیون و یخچال تلویزیون دایم و رفایش یخچال ویلا و هنا سرد کیشی و تلویزیون زنه مردم رنگینه یخچال ایشیدن مزانم چونه تلویزیون تعریف که اوضاع عالیه یخچال جواده نوم خالیه.
Plagued by corruption at home and sanctions from abroad, Iranian people, the poet says, are left to decipher what is true by comparing the colorful messaging about the success of Iranian state on state television with the contrast messaging from their empty fridges with almost no food left. Independent media is all but banned in Iran. Citizens and foreigners alike are regularly jailed for the crime of journalism, who is left then to write the first draft of history. With whom do television news networks like my own Iraqi Kurdistan, Rudaw, BBC Persian, Voice of America, or Iran International could consult with when news erupts? With no eyes on the ground, social media, NGOs, and careful network of reliable sources become crucial. It was a human rights organization that obtained the first images of Jina Mahsa Amini in Iran, showing her dying, broken body on a hospital bed following a beating by religious police for a slipped headscarf. It was an image that captured the attention of Iranian people and the world. The next images came from two local journalists, showing the moment Mahsa's parents learned of her death and the crowds at her funeral. Both journalists were later arrested. The thousands of people attending her funeral and sharing images became new data points. Video and audio traded between devices quickly. The crowd reasoned if it is on everyone's phone, it would be impossible to arrest everyone to kill the story. In the mountains of Iran's borders, more human rights volunteers were working to catalog, verify, and share footage as protests sprang up in the streets and in schools, chanting women, life, freedom, Jin, Jian, Azadi. We had seen this sort of reporting via social media before. It was in 2009 when desk editors in London pieced together the stories about the protests from the Green Movement, the first social media revolution. My project looks for lessons on how to verify information shared on social media and what happens when the state turns off the internet. My project gathers the best ideas for all of us to learn from coded telephone calls when you know the state is watching, to USB sticks carried across borders. How do we protect those who are shown and those who pass on information in a lockdown state? Is there a role for Starlink if enough devices are stored in key safe places across the region? As the poet warns us, the fridges of Iran tell a different story from the TVs of Iran. Until Samsung sends us a data dump from their smart fridges, we must be prepared to deal instead with trusted sources, applying stringent verification techniques and careful ethics and standards of protection.
I am from Nigeria,
And I'm from Israel,
two different places with different challenges.
but we do have something in common as journalists. We both cover conflicts, and we're both thinking about how it could be done better.
And both our life experiences informed our work. For me, I remember my mother's daily tears after we were forced to immigrate to the city from our village. I grew up in Sabongida Takai, a small village in Nigeria. The early years were happy and carefree, but everything changed when we heard the rumor that a neighboring village had been attacked by cattle herders. My father was a farmer. For as long as farmers and herders coexisted in Nigeria, there have been clashes. Now, as climate change exacerbates drought and shrinks crop growth, the farmer-herder crisis has grown increasingly deadly, claiming more than 1,500 lives in 2018 alone. That is why, at the peak of harvest in October 2001, when we heard the herders were coming, we gathered what we could and ran.
When I drive around the West Bank as a reporter for Haaretz, I often feel the weight of my identity in my role. I'm an Israeli reporter, I'm Jewish, and my job is to cover the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. This means talking to Palestinians, Jewish settlers, and Israeli army sources on a daily basis. Each of these groups views me and my work differently. Each has deterrents and incentives to talk, and these are often contradictory. When seeking to bring to our readers the events that people often try to ignore, questions of position and representation, as well as the enormous differences in narratives and how they shape the very language in which we speak or write, are always on my mind. Given that my work is often critical of Israeli polities and institutions, I am constantly navigating a complex landscape.
Back in 2001, my family narrowly escaped to the state capital, where my uncle was based. Our family of 6 joined his family of 6, cramped in a 2-room apartment. I remember the despair that followed us as we tried to rebuild our lives. My father struggled to restore our home and livelihood, but the damage was too extensive. Fast forward 20 years, and farmer header crisis rages on, while the effect on my family still linger. Even though I now work as a radio journalist, it is still a crisis I must navigate daily because it affects my audience too.
In the field, especially after major news events, I often meet Palestinian reporters. We frequently cover the same stories, but our access, the threats and hurdles we face, and the basic narratives of our societies are vastly different. For instance, I can thrive relatively freely in the West Bank, whereas they cannot cross checkpoints into Israel without permits and face military checkpoints inside the West Bank. The likelihood of me being targeted by the army is very low compared to the very real physical threats that they face. They are, of course, governed by the military of a state they are not citizens of. There are, of course, places they can easily access that I can't. People that will talk to them, but never to me. All of these factors shape our coverage in different ways, as well as our relationships.
In Nigeria, covering the farmer header crisis reveals a lack of reliable information from government sources, security concerns for journalists who cover these stories, an additional challenge that some areas can be impossible to reach to compound this report with our eyes. Because of government inaction, the crisis has turned from regional conflict into a widespread disaster that impacts Nigeria, Chad, and Ghana. I spoke to victims like Yohana Tafida, who lost 6 relatives and everything he owned when his village was burnt down. Forced to live in a temporary housing in public school, his story is one of the thousands that reflect the impact of displacement and having to start from scratch again and again because of farmer header crisis.
What you bring up, Samuel, the lack of access, threats, interviewing victims of conflicts are things that I deal with often. And I'm curious about how journalists from both sides of conflict in different countries perceive their job. What sort of dilemmas do they face when attempting to reflect to the other side of the conflict, to their audiences? What sort of fights they need to fight within their newsrooms about style guide, representation, and fair coverage? Another aspect is that of access to sources from the other side of the conflict. How do reporters make people who are suspicious of them based on their identity open up? What sort of conversations are they having with them? And what do they do to safeguard their safety?
How different have Nigerian journalists been covering the farmer header crisis? I asked 22 journalists if they felt our coverage was comprehensive or inadequate. 55% thought our coverage was inadequate because of challenges like access to information, difficult terrain, security risks I mentioned earlier. The media has brought attention to the crisis, but it has also been criticized for biased reporting and sensationalism.
Inequalities between reporters who are members of 2 groups within a conflict is central to my project. The different political and physical conditions under which reporters work and the power structures that dictate those conditions mean that very often there is an underlying tension between these 2 groups. In other aspects, these 2 groups very often rely on each other's work, even without directly communicating, with one performing the task the other cannot. What conditions, if at all, allow for the creation of solidarity between journalists from both sides? Is there a sense of allyship in the face of regimes that try to repress freedom of the press? Can journalists from different sides of a conflict help each other? And is this help even wanted?
To solve the farmer header crisis in Nigeria, effort must involve immediate humanitarian aid, long-term peace-building strategies, and active participation from both government and non-governmental organizations. Journalists covering this crisis need to go beyond reactionary coverage, providing a platform for diverse voices and investigating the root cause of conflict. For instance, understanding the role of climate change in exacerbating resource scarcity is crucial for comprehensive reporting. By addressing these deeper issues, we can spark necessary conversation and drive meaningful change.
My project aims to shed light on ethical and professional questions that many of us who cover conflicts from within are facing. To do that, I spoke with Indian, Kashmiri, Turkish, and Kurdish reporters. And while each of these conflict zones is different, the questions reporters grapple with seem to share commonalities. They all face personal risks for reporting critically on government policy. They all deal with professional questions of what it means to be a journalist, reporting on issues that very often hit quite literally too close to home.
For me, it is clear that achieving lasting peace requires addressing the root cause of land ownership and access right. Forgiveness and reconciliation are key to that process. But as journalists, keeping pressure on government policymakers to be proactively transparent about how they are implementing solutions should be at the top of our reporting agenda.
How does our access or lack of access create a certain narrative and leaves gaps in knowledge? This is a question that we constantly grapple with. Our access to official sources from our own society or the other side of the conflict shapes our coverage in profound ways. By addressing these disparities and working towards more equitable journalism, we can foster a more nuanced perspective on the reality we are facing, the communities we cover, and the institutions that we criticize.
In a quest for truth and accountability, we must also consider the power of language and how we tell our stories can reinforce existing power structure or challenge them. Reporting beyond immediate violence and driving into issues like climate change and resource scarcity can spark necessary conversation.
The stories that Samuel and I cover are complex and different, but we can learn from each other. I hope that my project could help reporters in similar situations think of ways to tackle problems they are facing. I also hope that through having a conversation about solidarity, or lack of solidarity, between reporters across conflict lines, inspiration for thoughtful and beneficial relationship will occur. We may not find definite answers, but we can ask those shared questions and think together about how to do our work better.
Anna is a dear friend and longtime neighbor who my daughters call bonus grandma. Anna underwent heart surgery a few years ago. She was discharged and came home to her husband, who had dementia. While recovering, she was dependent on social services for their meals. On offer from her council, Fjordland microwave-ready meals. This food contains too much salt for a patient who has just undergone heart surgery. But with increasingly squeezed budgets, it was all her home place could offer. By 2031, there will be more elderly people in Norway than young. As they age, more people will live at home, dependent on the help of social services. I work in a newsroom in Norway's largest trade union, serving an audience of readers who work in public sector. After I learned about Anna's story, I asked the 357 municipalities in Norway about what services they offer sick and elderly people living at home. We could have published a critical takedown about the large differences characterizing the food supply and how much tax money Fjordland earns for its salty services. And we could have focused more on the one appliance you definitely can't do without when you're dependent on help, the microwave. My neighbor's story could have ended here. But this would not have been the whole story. Because in fact, there are countless municipal employees who have found different solutions to this problem and from whom others can learn if their experiences are shared. Rather than only reporting a straight piece on how the elderly are put at risk by cost cutting, I sought innovative stories. Among them, the head chef of one communal kitchen. He thought in new ways and changed his routines so the kitchen could help more people without increasing staffing. In his kitchen, they see everyone as their guests. This is constructive journalism. It does not shy away from flagging a major societal problem, but seeks out those who have found solutions or workarounds. You've heard a lot tonight about audience needs. My audience is 400,000 members of the public sector. Among them are those who made sure that my daughters could safely attend first nursery and then school. Those who make sure that elderly receive care either at home or in nursing homes. Those who make sure that I can commute using reliable public transport and drink clean water from the tap every day. They need to hear about the highly qualified people among them who achieve good results when it comes to everyday safety, health, and the government's bottom line. The very DNA of a trade union. So what would it look like if my newsroom practiced more constructive journalism? I found examples from the region. The Swedish national broadcast, they often report on increasing game crime in Sweden. They've also shown readers an example in Norrköping, explaining how parents took matters in their own hands to improve the situation. In Norway, 1 out of 5 people drop out of college. But the Norwegian national broadcaster also writes about Ung Invest, a policy led by several councils that have helped 5,000 youth to complete their education with a tailor-made plan for every student. Constructive journalism is not children playing out in the snow with sleds or kittens saved from the trees. That is feel-good journalism. Nor is it a journey to fairyland when all's well that ends well. Journalists who work with constructive journalism do not sit in a circle and sing Kumbaya. Moonlighting as life coaches or motivational gurus who turn a blind eye to the misery in the world to feel good. They do not run the Happy News network. It's not propaganda or empty positive spin. But constructive journalism is also not a replacement for traditional news coverage, breaking news, or investigative journalism, but it can complete it. For me, constructive journalism helps to describe what in our society is going in the right direction. It must be a social problem at its core. The solution must be underway, and we must be able to scrutinize the solution. When there are stories, like serving Anna better food, stories we can easily agree on, stories increasing the understanding of each other, I believe it can even decrease polarization.
Sustainability, environment, climate change, ESG. These aren't just buzzwords. They're the headlines of the most crucial stories of our time. But covering them?
People think they're boring.
Let's face it, these topics are complex, often feeling distant or buried in acronyms and jargon that leave your head spinning. And the news often feels like a downer, leaving people feeling powerless and overwhelmed.
People avoid reading about climate change. They're worried about misinformation and they're sick of bad news. Signe and I are trying to tell some of the most important stories of our time, and we're wondering how to get people interested in them.
I work on stories about ESG for finance media outlet, and Rebekah works on science stories. Our common mission? To cut through the complexity, make this story relatable, and engage our audience in a way that inspires action and hope. It's a tall order, but it's a challenge we must meet.
As an editor, I discovered that the least popular type of story I could publish is one about climate change. It's complicated, it's distant, there's just no upside. People feel powerless in the face of it. It's just the worst possible type of story in every way.
And then you discovered geoengineering.
Yeah, so geoengineering, that's when people meddle with Earth's natural systems in an attempt to fix climate change. It's kind of science fictional. Like, one idea is to spray a lot of particles into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight to stop the world getting hotter. But most of the ideas involve sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, since that's what's making the world warmer.
So if we do it right, we could basically reverse climate change?
Yeah, exactly. But we're only just getting started. We need to remove a lot of carbon dioxide if we're going to stop the planet warming up by more than 2 degrees. So to keep us in the safe zone.
Because if we stopped all carbon emissions tomorrow, the world would still keep heating up. We've already baked in a certain level of warming.
Yeah, so we definitely need to soak up a lot of carbon dioxide. And we already have a massive thing on Earth that absorbs carbon dioxide. It's the ocean. Over time, it'll soak up all of the extra CO2 that we've put into the atmosphere in a few thousand years or so. So one geoengineering idea is to make the sea soak up carbon dioxide more quickly. And the way you do that is by tipping particular chemicals into the ocean.
There are huge questions to be answered about this idea. What chemicals do you use? And does it have any side effects? Where should we test this? Who's going to be okay with the radical experiments happening off their coast?
Well, these stories are interesting because the stakes are so high. We know that if we don't take action, climate change is going to mess up life on Earth. So, should we take the chance of meddling with the ocean in the hope of making less of a mess? How do we make these decisions about our global commons, the sky, the sea? How do journalists ensure the public stays informed about both the risks and the benefits?
It's a fascinating concept and important questions. I'm eager to bring these stories to my Danish audience at Finance. But is there a more engaging way to communicate these complex topics than a more traditional article fitted for print? One of the key things the public wants from journalism is to understand the complexity of the world we live in. They do want to understand how we address the climate crisis. When it comes to stories about the environment, climate change, and sustainability, there's an overwhelming amount to explain. And the younger generation seems increasingly disinterested in traditional news formats. They turn away from news and look for information elsewhere.
That means it's really crucial for us to rethink how we reach and engage our audiences. To stay relevant as journalists and media outlets, we need to be innovative, not only in terms of the stories we tell, but how we present them. So, what formats we use.
A 600-word traditional article, he said, she said, and then an expert, might be the best way to tell certain stories to a certain audience. But others might prefer a super short summary, bullet points, or a data-driven infographic, a soundbite, a video clip, or something completely different. Maybe a news game, like the Financial Times do, to inform the audience in new ways and encourage them to emotionally understand stories about Uber or the climate change. Imagine if readers could choose how they would prefer the stories to be presented. Some innovative journalists are actually working on exactly that, such as Scroll Media in India, where they're trialing an idea to let readers choose their own news adventure, so to speak.
That sounds really interesting, but also really time-consuming to make.
Well, time is definitely an obstacle to innovating formats. But the most distressing finding of my project? The huge gap in knowledge and interest between those who are trying to innovate with new formats and technology and those reporting on the news, even in the same organization. I heard from top climate journalists, I'm a writer, I write. And from top innovators, yeah, we did spend the year making and testing new formats, but no one really knows about them.
So you're saying we've invented new ways to tell stories, but we're just not using them, even though they're right there.
Well, it does seem challenging to bring the limited innovation in the media industry all the way through to the audience. And if we don't innovate and adjust to people's information needs, we risk becoming irrelevant and losing our audience entirely.
Exactly. If a story is important but no one reads it, does it matter? I don't think so. I think we need to pay really close attention to our readers. After all, we serve them above everybody else.
Well, like your work on geoengineering, I see a huge opportunity here for journalism to create and foster public dialogue. We can explain complicated science in terms people understand. We can check the facts impartially. We can provide a space for these important conversations to take place.
Sure can.
All right, now whether we realise it or not, personalisation is now part of everyday life. From recommendations on what to buy to customised Spotify playlists with songs that you forgot that you love to what search results you see. I personally love that Netflix knows to serve me English period dramas with strong female leads, like and Mr. Darcy, but personalising the news, well, that raises a much bigger dilemma. How do we balance technological advancement with journalistic integrity and user trust? Digital expert Sonali Verma hit the nail on the head when she told me that most news publishers produce a ton of content that the public has no interest in and will never see. But if you can focus your resources on the stuff that really matters and make it easier for them to find, you're doing your news organisation a service and you're helping build a better society. So at the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where I work, we're introducing a new personalisation algorithm soon. It has the potential to deliver undiscovered content to the right audiences more efficiently and effectively. But there's understandably some concern amongst journalists that important stories might not perform well in the algorithm. And I mean, fair enough. Public interest journalism plays a vital role in a democratic society by informing citizens, holding power to account, and fostering public debate. But it's often on dark and hard to sell topics and can struggle to achieve the same number of readers as something that's sensationalist or entertainment focused. So in an age of personalisation, which is largely unavoidable, how can we ensure that important, albeit less popular stories still reach a broad audience? So one important approach that I've researched is the development of algorithms that weight content based on more than just user engagement metrics like popularity, which is the lever that personalisation most often uses. For example, SR Radio's public service algorithm in Sweden integrates their organisation's values into the algorithm. For example, it gives more weight to stories filed on location, including affected voices, providing new perspectives and offering independent analysis. So by adding these parameters, which are like a ranking when they input the story, they ensure that stories critical to the public understanding and democratic engagement are surfaced alongside those that are merely popular. And it's so effective that the European Broadcasting Union is working on a project to adopt similar value levers in recommender systems. Looking further abroad, the Globe and the Mail in Canada is almost fully personalised, which is a pretty wild concept, but it takes a human-in-the-loop approach. So it leaves the top 3 story slots for editors to manually prioritise what they see as important news to ensure it receives prominence regardless of whether it's popular on the day or not. This approach, in theory, helps maintain a balance between editorial judgment and personalisation. Now, at the ABC, our personalisation experiment will leave much of the homepage curation to humans, but we're going to add a range of For You topic feeds. So we're stepping our toes in the water on things like local news based on user location. The ABC's opting for login-based personalisation rather than IP tracking, which is just following you around once you land on the page. This allows us to collect more data, but it also gives more privacy, and we can give content recommendations across devices. But it also means we have to work a lot harder to get young users to sign up and then sign in order for it to work. The next iteration beyond this of personalisation coming to newsrooms will integrate user feedback and offer them, as in the audience, enhanced control of how they receive the news. For example, imagine a news site which allows you to choose whether you get the story behind the headline as a summary, audio briefing, video, infographic, long form article. And that work is well and truly already underway. So as the technology evolves, newsrooms need to be sure of the values that will inform their response. Generative AI, for example, may have productivity benefits, but will require built-in safeguards, checks, and transparency guidelines to protect against inaccurate or misleading information. Do we sign over our content to OpenAI, as News Corp has recently done? Or, as one academic put it to me, are we signing our own death warrant by doing so? Should we build our own large language models within news? Or should we work more strategically with generative AI organisations to enhance our own offering and make it easier to find our content? At the end of the day, and people, it is the end of the day, the drinks are soon. In digital development, you are not going to have the answers up front. You need to go out and iterate and try new things. And as one personalisation expert told me, the longer we delay it, the worse the outcome is potentially going to be because it will be done in a rush to catch up. We simply cannot avoid it. Protecting public interest journalism whilst personalising the news is not just a technical challenge, but an ethical one too. And yet another huge change management exercise within newsrooms. It requires a thoughtful integration of technology with sound editorial judgment and clear principles. But if we get it right, and when we do, there are many rewards to reap. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, everyone. On an evening like this, it would be very easy to stand up here and give a short speech about how great journalism is and how important it is and how much it matters for society and democracy. And I think we're all here because we hope that can be true. But I'm also certain that many of you can relate to the work presented here by our journalists today, who provides reminders that journalism can sometimes also be irrelevant. Sometimes it can come across as being indifferent, or even complicit with or cruelly indifferent to structural inequality and injustice in our societies. So instead of sort of waxing lyrical about journalism in the abstract, I will simply say this, that all of us at the Institute do what we do every day because we believe in you. We believe in concrete journalists, in journalists who believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. Not in every way, not everywhere, not for everyone, but in concrete, specific, principle-based ways that all of you have shown us tonight, that you have really important and specific ideas for what you would like to achieve in your own work with colleagues and in journalism more broadly, which is a true inspiration for all of us, and it's an absolute privilege to work with this community. I want to thank you for coming to the Institute and coming to Oxford. We have all benefited tremendously from your curiosity, your openness to learning new things, to learning from people you never heard of, from organizations you never heard of, countries that you weren't aware of, or places that ought to be countries but aren't yet. For your kindness to one another in a really diverse group where sometimes there will be friction, there will be disagreements. This is important. This is as it ought to be, but also I think empathy with one another. And furthermore, I think the commitment that all of you have shown in your work, which we've only seen slivers of here today, your kindness to the people that you cover and the issues that you cover, where you deal with people who don't like you, and sometimes with people who hate you or hate what they think you represent. And I think that the ability to seek truth and report it under those circumstances is particularly inspiring and important for all of us. Finally, I hope that you will leave Oxford with confidence. You have brought so much to a university that is not always aware of how much it benefits from people with many different backgrounds and experiences joining a institution that can sometimes be quite clear about what it thinks its role in the world is and its place in the world. You have all made Oxford a better place. And I hope that you have drawn as much from one another as we have learned from you, and that you return to your work and will continue to show the curiosity and kindness you've shown in your work with us, and with increased confidence in the importance of what you do and the infinite perfectibility of journalism. I often say at these events, and I will say that again tonight, that you will leave Oxford, as I will soon leave Oxford. But the same way that I feel, I hope you will feel that you will never leave the Reuters Institute, because we are a community based on shared values, shared ideals, and a willingness to learn from one another. And that community exists in time and in space, and not just in one building, in one town. And you will always be part of that community if you want to. So thank you so much for what you brought to it and given to it. And I hope that you have enjoyed that community as much as we have enjoyed you joining it. Thank you very much. And now we will call you up one at a time to get a very nice piece of paper. Hagar, can I call you up first? Please.
Hagar voted.
I think we will take smile.
Hagar voted most likely to start conversations that indirectly end wars.
Thank you. Ingeborg.
Most likely to write stories that the Norwegian public sector workers can't wait to read, and most likely to visit her grandson in Nigeria.
Laura.
Most likely to break the Australian iTunes podcast charts with a multimedia investigation that sparks a public inquiry.
Rebekah.
Most likely to spot bad science and celebrate baddie scientists.
Signe.
Most likely to be the first finance journalist in history to actually talk to someone in the web development team about something other than their password.
Charlie.
Most likely to be the next editor-in-chief of The Guardian if she wants to, or start a new news outlet that redefines the UK news culture.
Hanna.
Most likely to be featured in an ULE documentary about the future of local news that gets sold to Netflix.
Congratulations. Thank you. June.
Most likely to make Nikkei Publishing break into the American market when his smash hit book about Marie and Bessie is translated into English.
Osamah.
Most likely to lead the journalism department at a university in the capital of Kurdistan.
Samuel.
Most likely to remain the pride of his village, even when he tells stories they don't like to hear. It looks like I've got one more certificate here. I'm not sure.
honorary membership to the Fellowship for Lifetime for Rasmus Kleis Nielsen, most likely to always speak truth to power and have no bullshit involved in the process.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much to the whole Institute team, in particular Caitlin, for all the work that goes into this. And now remains only for me to say, let's drink. Thank you.